Good morning, everyone. Good. Allow me to stand here and accept my anxiety. Okay. Yes, I am a clinical social worker. So I'm going to get right into it. Believe it or not, I experience what most children in the Child Protective Service system endure on a daily basis. Behavioral issues, excessive alcohol, drugs, abuse, neglect, and the list goes on. At the age of 11 months, I was violated from an adult seeking one's own self-gratification. This is where trauma was born into my life. At the age of 2, my mother was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease known as multiple sclerosis. And she decided to place me and my sister into my grandmother's care until she became well. At the age of 3, I was removed from my mom because of domestic violence. And I was placed back with my grandmother in a small rural town known as Blountstown, Florida, in a small community known as Hugh Creek. At the age of 5, I was placed back with my mom, and this is where trauma began to metastasize itself through my little body. First removal. My mom married a man that didn't love her or anything about her. He would ask, when are you going to take me and my sister back to my grandmother's house, because he didn't want us around. By the age of 6, my little body was taken advantage of again. Second removal. At the age of 8, I was a child with behavioral issues, disrespectful to authority figures, and no one wanted their children to play with me. I felt so isolated. From ages 8 to 10, I was with my mom. And at the age of 10, I experienced my first ride in a police car. I mean, it wasn't a ride along or a tour of my neighborhood, but it was to the local juvenile detention facility. This is where the first time I stood before a judge to testify on protecting myself, because I decided not to be an emotional or physical punching bag from my stepfather. Then I was taken to a local foster care facility known as Capital City Youth Services here in Tallahassee, CCYS. Third removal. I want you to sit and think about, can you imagine being separated from your family repeatedly? And that's what that photo represents. I can remember before the separation occurred, or before, back then it was HRS, will come and take me to my grandmother. I will hold on to my mom's clothing so tight, my grip will rip her clothing. At the age of 11, I was with my grandmother. I remember one night, to be exact, 9 p.m. It was a dark night. My grandmother got a phone call, and I answered the phone. And a lady was on there screaming, "April, you need to get down to your uncle's house, quick." So I frantically went and woke up my sister and my aunt. Once we arrived, we saw my uncle laying there with stab wounds in his chest. 10 months later, my 11-year-old self was testifying on what I witnessed. From birth up to the age of 18, I was taken away from my mom 3 times. Growing up, I had very little hope of achieving, or what I like to call living on that street called very successful, due to multiple removals, due to lack of security, and due to instability. At the age of 12, I was a lost teen who needed love, compassion, and empathy. Quite frankly, I am a social worker. However, I thought social workers were baby snatchers due to the multiple removals. So again, I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to take a moment and think about, what does trauma look like? Study shows that traumatic experiences are often better remembered and more difficult to forgetting than those compared to more pleasant experiences. Speaking as a current licensed clinical social worker that has experienced childhood trauma, I bring a new approach on how to approach or eliminate unnecessary removals from the family. The systematic approach regarding social workers and child welfare professionals should view trauma differently so that it will result in less removal or if any removals. I believe social workers should not judge a child's removal solely on what they see on the surface, but have a thorough investigation to avoid removal at all costs. I want you to say to yourself, separation plus anxiety equals trauma. Research states the implementation for practice is that removals should be conducted in the least stressful manner as possible. Although child protective investigators have some experience with working with maltreated children, they lack the specialized knowledge on dealing with children with emotional and teaching them how to be coping with their trauma. In the therapeutic context, emotionally working through a traumatic separation from caretakers is extremely important to social workers. How you remove a child from the home, if you start off with the high level of the stress, then more than likely the child is not going to trust you. The state of Florida, here today, as of September 9th, 2019, there are a total of 24,343 kids in foster care. I'm going to repeat that. As of September 9th, 2019, there are a total of 24,343 children that are in the foster care system. We need a system with more social workers that can sympathize and be empathetic with the problems families are faced with. We must have social workers understand the problems they initially see at the surface when dealing with these families and young children. They must learn to look closely with the goal of keeping the child safely in the home. Children in the system do not see their problems the way we see their problems. They see their problems differently. They see their families first. They don't see their families as drug abusers, users, or any other negatives. They see their families as nurturers, their loved ones, the ones they have been with all their lives. If we remove them from that situation without first investigating it, we will cause them a great deal of pain. Imagine if the child in the child welfare system trained professionals to see and understand removals is result to trauma. This system that looks into providing options that first keep children in the home and reduce out-of-home placements such as foster care. Well, how can we address this? The first measure is to address hotline calls. Those are the calls that you first get when someone calls to report abuse or neglect. We must have professionals that see trauma differently and utilize options that keep children safely in the home. As a society, we must educate individuals on the true effects of trauma. The way we currently view trauma must change. Trauma doesn't have a race, a sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, or anything of that nature. It is time for us to expose trauma with solutions on eliminating it with investigating the true cause of removing a child from the home. This right here is my baby. And I would literally lose my mind if she was ever removed from me. I get anxiety when she goes spend the weekend with her family. So I want to leave this here with you today. When someone asks you, how can a child survive repeated trauma, you can simply say, ask April McCray, and she can tell you. Thank you.